Welcome everybody to the final session for today. It is the browser-based crawling for all, the story so far. A panel by project team Anders, Klindt Myrvoll from Iipc, Royal Danish Library, Andy Jackson, who is absent today, Ben O'Brien and Sholto Duncan from the National Library of New Zealand, Ilya Kreymer of Webrecorder, Lauren Coe of the University of North Texas Libraries, and we have additional use cases joining us. Jasmine Mulliken from Stanford University Press, and Andreas Predikaka and Antares Reich from the Austrian National Library. I'm sorry about your names and my pronunciation, but so we're very excited to have everybody here. We'll kick it off with Ilya giving us a brief overview and recap of the project and what's been.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so I'll just do a quick recap. It's really exciting. I think a lot of you have already seen the tool and it was featured in all the videos. So I'm not going to do a demo, I think, but please take a look at the videos if you haven't seen Browserx Cloud in action yet. Yeah, so I'll just do a quick recap of kind of what the goals are and sort of where we are. So obviously the focus of the tool is on high fidelity browser-based crawling. Since the web is designed to be viewed in browsers, we want to use browsers to create as accurately as possible the archive. Also want to create an easy to use interface for anyone to be able to configure crawling options, both simple ones as well as advanced ones with custom scoping rules and additionally exclusion rules. And so we're continuing to iterate on that. We want to make it possible for users to watch crawls in real time so they can see exactly what's happening as the crawler is running. Want to support pre-creating browser profiles so that users can log in and accept cookie pop-ups and so forth before they start the crawl. And so that's what we have already in place. We're also working on the ability to create collections. So that's kind of one of the new features that we'll have in an upcoming release. So once crawls are created, they can be grouped into arbitrary collections, and multiple crawls can be put in multiple collections. So we're figuring out the exact UI workflow for that. And we also want to support treating the web archives really as any other type of digital object. And that's sort of the idea behind the WAX-Z format that we've created, so that web archives can be stored on standard cloud storage and really just any web server and loaded through a static website the way that you would load a PDF or a video. And so that's kind of our overarching goal. And I think that will, the idea behind that is to really make web archives more accessible to those that don't otherwise have access to web archiving tools, and of course to build open source tools that anyone can use, and all of our work is open source. Yeah, and so our kind of just our brief roadmap of what we're doing will be in our next update, we'll have a workflow centric view where crawls will be grouped by associated with the initial configuration, and we'll have ability to track the crawl config, editing, and the revision history as well. Then we'll also have support for collections, so grouping of crawls into collections after the fact and making them public. So right now I think everything is designed to be private within the application. We'll have new curatorial features coming up with the collection UI. And then next big thing after that will be the interactive archiving sessions, which are sort of the classic Webrecorder approach of archiving as you manually browse, which right now is available through our archive webpage extension. That will be part of that will be integrated into Browserx Cloud. in the future release, and so that will allow for essentially patching and kind of manual QA using the same process as the profile creation UI. So you could start a browser and interact with it, and it'll archive things manually as you browse, and then those archiving sessions could be combined with crawls into collections to kind of have a kind of augmented view that combines both crawling and interactive archives in the same place. So that's kind of our sort of roadmap, and we're hoping to have that towards the end of Q2. And that's sort of part of our Iipc collaboration project, focusing on manual QA for the end of this quarter. And then at the same time, we're also working on expanding our beta and launching a SaaS service around Browserx Cloud so that we can become a little bit more sustainable. So that's our goal is to roll out kind of a closed pilot with some different pricing tiers, and we'll have information about that in the upcoming months. And of course, part of that will be supporting different crawling options and different storage options, including potentially self-hosted storage, so that idea is that you could sort of bring your own S3 bucket or other type of storage and have Browserx Cloud crawl into that rather than our storage, and so have different options around there, as well as possibly publishing web archives to a static site that is essentially a static website that loads WAXI files, and would like to scale that to at least in the terabyte range. We know we could do it at gigabytes. Definitely aiming for terabytes first, then we'll see from there. And part of that is also we're working on additional improvements to the WAXI format and clarifying certain aspects of the spec, including signing and verification and additional metadata that could be added to the WAXI format. And we're also working on how to specify multiple WAXI files linked together, and that's kind of where what will be the foundation of collections. So we'll have a spec for multiple crawls that are stored in WAXI files and linked together through a spec that combines multiple files where they can be found and metadata that's associated with them. And part of that is we're also experimenting with putting more WAXI files onto IPFS and having a spec around that, and making it possible to host WAXI files in all sorts of different places and as many different storage options as possible. And then beyond that, finally, we have we'll be adding support for uploading existing work in WAXI files into Browserx Cloud, more work on storage options mentioned, and trying to scale out deployment to larger multi-machine deployments. We've been testing currently on DigitalOcean and AWS, probably test on other cloud environments, and of course continuing to support everyone who has deployed Browserx Cloud locally. That's really exciting to see that. I know various folks have run into issues with Kubernetes, as it can be a challenging system to deploy initially. So we hope to improve our documentation around that and make it easy for those that want to self-host Browserx Cloud to be able to do that as easily as possible. And then automated QA is slated for later in the year. We try to keep everything that we're doing on GitHub, and we've kind of settled into a 2-week sprint cycle. And you could see our on our GitHub project, which I'll put in the channel. You can kind of keep up with what we're doing and what our current work plan is.
And also submit bugs, right, Ilya?
Yes, and submit bug reports as well. Yes, in both the Browserx Cloud repo as well as those associated with other tools, but we can move them around if it's in the wrong repo.
So we have on the call people who have locally deployed Browsertrix cloud, and I would really like to hear from them now, particularly people who recorded their video some time ago and may have updates of what's been going on at their institution since then. So first, I'd like to ask Antares and Andreas to speak.
So yeah, it's about 2 months we started with the first local deployment. So we had also a few updates meanwhile. It's also very challenging as I'm really new to Kubernetes. It was a lot of learning how to get to the right log files, how to use the namespace and get to the right instances to get the information what's wrong. In the beginning, I had a little bit trouble with the firewall, but I use micro 8Ks on Ubuntu, and there's a useful help page which resolved all these issues. So now we can enjoy the progress because it's now we have also a really cool new feature to modify the qual list, so the seed list, dynamically, and you see already or red highlighted which seeds will not be qualled anymore and fell out of the scope. That's really cool, and that's helped a lot of fast set up qual for new page. Yeah, but we have not the issue with not much data, so we are limited to low memory cores with a low size, and so I have also to test a lot of the limits, and here I'm not 100% sure now how it works behind, so it's still a lot of learning how the machine actually works.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andreas.
No, but the results are good, especially in the beginning for Twitter. We were really amazed when not having a lot of effort to get results which are usable. So that was really cool.
Thanks so much for that update. Do any of the other use case presenters have updates for us before we get into questions? No? Okay, cool. So please, audience, submit questions into the Q&A. I want to get started with a question for all of the panelists. For people who are joining us who may not be, head deep in web archives and web archiving, could you explain why browser-based crawling is important for you and for your institution?
Okay, I can start. Can you hear me?
Thanks, Anders.
Yeah,
Yes.
so we used, I don't know how many hours crawling national Danish newspaper using iframes, and it was when we have a paywall, it needs to set some kind of iframe so you know that you're like a user or something. And it was just impossible for us to crawl behind paywall content. We used too many hours to get Umbra to function in Heritrix, but we never get it to scale. So it is getting these kind of strange quirks to actually be able to harvest that. It's also to harvest YouTube embedded videos and the like. That is pretty difficult. Right now it works fine because it's on Dutch IPs. I don't know how it will work when we get back to our own IPs that are blocked by Google, but so it's a way of getting content a way you can't do otherwise. So we're looking forward to put it into our workflow. There's a big asymmetry between how the web is and how we capture it. I know we can't get all of it, of course, but at least getting examples is important.
Anders, can you clarify the Dutch IPs? Is that because of DigitalOcean, or did you set up a proxy?
No, so we use the Browsertrix cloud now. So they have IPs that have not been blocked yet by Google, YouTube. Same goes for Archivate. So it's basically it's not a workaround because we don't use it in production yet, but it is IP mangling that is very interesting. We just want them to open up, but at least for some, it could be a potential way to use it. I know other people needs to do a local installation due to policies, and we will as well. But we can get content we couldn't do before, and in a more we've used Conifer and ArchiveWeb a lot, but I just recently today tried to manually crawl from Facebook sites, and it takes quite a long time. It's easier to do in a Browsertrix Cloud, and then you of course have to, make sure that you don't bug the Facebook servers too much, and then otherwise you'll get a new login saying, oh, there's been suspicious activities on your Facebook account. So, but at least we can do something. The same goes with Instagram, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Anders. Can I get a second volunteer?
I will volunteer.
Thank you, Lauren.
So at UNT libraries, we don't crawl a lot of social media, which is kind of a big use case for Browsertrix Cloud, but something that I've always kind of struggled with is embedded video, which I talk about in the video, because we have over the years that we've been archiving, used Heritrix, and it eventually added kind of the extractor that uses YouTube DL to get embedded video, but it would end up with, from what I could tell, a lot of duplicates and taking up a lot of disk space, and it doesn't automatically replay the video if you're providing access in Outback or OpenWayback or PyWB even. And we had in recent years started using the record mode of PyWB on a very small scale to record some video that would replay in PyWB. But now using Browsertrix Cloud, we're able to scale up a little of our video collection. And I was also very pleased that even taking an old Heritrix crawl and finding the embedded videos that should be replaying in that, I was able to give those URLs for the embedded videos to Browsertrix Cloud and combine it with the Heritrix crawl and have video working. So we probably aren't using Browsertrix Cloud or planning to use it as a solo solution for crawling, but it really fits in well with using Heritrix for portions of to improve things that Heritrix doesn't do well.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm curious about those embedded videos. YouTube has been mentioned. It's so streaming applications? I know last year on our online conference was a big topic. And so I'm curious if it is your institution that you're archiving, is it possible to push to get like local videos, instead of capturing streaming services, if that makes sense? This is kind of off topic.
If that's specifically to me, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
we have at UNT we're do unt.edu crawls twice a year, and it's every subdomain, and every college, every department, everyone has their own website that they're running. It seems small scale compared to a national library, but in like the context of what I'm doing, it's like coordinating that, and then they all have their own social media pages. So that is something I wondered about, and I'm not sure if the university archivist is collecting videos in another way, but I'm not aware of it. So yeah, it's something to look at, is like, what is happening to all this video that's produced for the web? I'm not sure. So that's why I'm just kind of trying to cover things and get what I can.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm curious how Browsertrix as the tool is going to fit into existing workflows. So I've muted myself. Continuing on the question for everyone about why browser-based crawling. We haven't heard from Jasmine yet.
Yeah, I think that my outside noise has subsided enough that I can jump into the conversation. So I'm coming from the perspective of a scholarly publisher. So the content that we're dealing with is content that should be part of the scholarly record. And if the work was being published like a typical book, then that would be no problem. Books have their own kind of archiving workflow. Libraries usually take over that from the publisher once the work is distributed. But since we're publishing online only books, I guess you could still call them, they need a whole different kind of workflow for ensuring that they remain part of that scholarly record. And so I think it's important for my community, and which also kind of borders on digital humanities, that we have this kind of tool because it offers sort of an in-between for people who are tech savvy enough to be able to build like a web publication, but maybe not as involved in like the back end kind of command line stuff that some of these some other web archiving tools require. And then you have a lot more options in Browsertrix Cloud than you do, like say in Conifer or the more kind of simple GUI based capturing tools. So I think that Browsertrix Cloud offers a kind of good medium space for authors of web content who may only just now be starting to realize that what they need, that preservation and and capture needs to be part of their like production process whenever they're building these things. And then it was interesting too. I have maybe a little bit of perspective on the video question, because one of our publications actually did involve over 400 embedded videos in the publication. So the publication itself had, you know, a typical book length amount of text, but within that text were these 400 video clips, which were interviews. It was all original content. Those videos don't exist anywhere else separately from this publication. So it was important to capture those in the context of the publication and not just as separate saved video files. It was important that it was actually like all in the space where it was originally published. So unfortunately, the author had embedded them from Vimeo rather than hosting them locally with the project and pulling them in just through HTML. And by the time we got the project to publish it, it was too late for their developer to go in and recode and store all the videos locally. It also would have taken up a lot of room on the server. So they wanted to keep those videos on Vimeo, and they wanted to still be able to just embed them using the script that they had written for their database to draw out like Vimeo IDs. So those videos are still external, but the only way to really capture the whole publication in context and also include those videos was web archiving. We couldn't use emulation because emulation would have required a network connection to be able to pull live content. And we still did kind of remediate all of that as a test, but it took a lot of work. And it did ultimately kind of change like what the back end of the publication looked like. So I think that like having everything in context is one of the major reasons to kind of keep the videos as they are, and Browsertrix Cloud offers the ability to be able to do that.
That's amazing. That sounds like such a big project.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And Sholto, finally, I think it's 4 a.m. there for you.
Yeah, I'm slowly waking up. So our use case is quite similar. Embedded videos was a big part of what we haven't been able to capture, and we're looking at testing and other embedded media as well, such as audio. But also we've been finding with our Heritrix-based crawling that there's more and more sites that we just can't capture due to their dynamic nature. Sites with, say, infinity scrolling and things like that, where things are constantly loading on the page and don't tend to get picked up by traditional harvesters. So we were really keen to test out Browsertrix for those type of sites, and we had quite a long list of those type of sites to test, and yeah, we've had some great results so far. We also had a couple of platforms that we repeatedly have had issues with, such as Squarespace and Wix. So they were two big things that we wanted to test out, and yeah, we've had mixed results with that, but more positives with Squarespace for sure, but still quite a few issues capturing Wix sites. But yeah, we're making progress, and it's great to have a new tool to be able to test and try some of these sites out on.
Thank you. Yeah, I have some more pointed questions for you regarding the image files that y'all mentioned in your presentation. But before we do that, I'll go to the audience question, which is, what advice would you give for archiving Instagram accounts for the purpose of preserving the look and feel of the platform? The crawler we use has issues with the login wall. And so Andreas has offered to take that.
Yeah, okay, so in a very short time, you'd use Browsertrix Cloud or something. But what we did was actually, before we used Pixuki or Pikuki or whatever it's called, a mirror that looks almost similar to Instagram, but that is also a bit flawed now and you get logged out. So what we did was using the Archive Web browser extension and injecting code into that. We figured out a way that we could get, for instance, get an Instagram account with, let's say, 1,000 posts and 1,000 reels or something like that, and then just like crawl all of this. Then we submitted actually the code to the Browsertrix Cloud because it's something that needed to be, it was some code we did locally, but I think it's a pull request or it has maybe already been done. And then that will work in the Browsertrix Cloud when you make a browser profile, where you probably log in with Facebook or something awkward, and then you could specify log in with Facebook, and then you log into Instagram, and then you go to this profile. What we figured out was that you need PyWB or something similar that can handle post requests in a modern manner. So you can use Open Wayback, and you can unfortunately not use Solar Wayback as well. So you need to have the tandem of Solar Wayback and PyWB that understand these post requests. Then you will have perfect playback. We tested that. So if you do it in Solar Wayback, you just have a pulsing Instagram icon, but you could search for the VARC files and see the job and see you have, let's say, 1,000 image files, but you can't see it in look and feel, but you can do that in PyWB. So that's my recommendation. But I don't know how long it will work and if you'll be thrown out, and but this, maybe they're not as strict as Facebook. So yeah. And then you just make a corporate login for your curators or whatever, and then you use that login instead of your own private login.
Yeah, it's complicated, and what you're describing involves tons of development, right? It's not kind of, you know,
I think
plug and play.
Ilya can answer, but I think this will definitely, in let's say a few weeks' time, in a month's time, it will be plug and play. It's just a matter of logging into Browsertrix Cloud, using your credentials to log in, save that, and then you specify which Instagram accounts you want to be crawled. But you have to be aware of load balancing. So it's not something that will involve developers on a curator side. Yeah.
Ilya?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just to add to that, yeah, that's sort of the idea behind the browser profile feature in Browsertrix Cloud, where you could essentially pre-configure a browser by logging into sites like Instagram and Facebook, and then kind of save that browser profile, which is just like your browser profile in your local browser, and then start the crawl with that browser profile applied. And that generally does work, but there's always a bug in that so sometimes you could still get logged out, and it's sort of hard to predict when that might happen. So even if you log in the cloud, the social media site can still log you out eventually, and so we don't yet have an automated way of detecting that. But as long as you could at least test your profile before you start, and then you should be able to kind of start a crawl with a URL list of multiple Instagram profiles. And there's also the rate limit. So maybe doing one at a time is probably the safest, because if it detects that you're loading 100 Instagram profiles at a time all at once or something like that, or even 10 maybe, it might get suspicious. So yeah, I mean, there's always this kind of cat and mouse thing, but we're trying to iterate on that and make it as easy as possible. And hopefully the browser profile is a step forward in that.
Thank you, Ilya. We had one more question from anonymous attendee. Do any of the panelists have a sense of how Browsertrix Cloud compares with other browser-based crawling, such as Browser? maybe the people who have done use cases could tell me what the comparison would be like for them.
Okay, so what I've experienced is at least Archivate is not open source, so you just buy in and do stuff there. So that's of course easy and great for many institutions. But there's also the workflow, so you have to get the VARC files with the API, and it's not that simple. I think it could be better. I hope they're working on getting better workflow for getting your archive. It's definitely much easier here. We've used it for some YouTube content. It gets the video, but I'm not sure if it gets it in context. 3 years ago, we used it for a lot of Facebook content. Got some of it, but some of it was locked out. So I would definitely say that it works great for some stuff, but you don't have a good way to playback it because it used like an old out of date playback machine. So what does that matter? Then you go in and see on the resources what has been harvested, and you see, oh, there's 1,000 videos, great, but I can't really see if they play back or anything. And before you get it into your system, it could take months because the way you get the API, and yeah, then you need to validate them and ingest them. And so I'm hoping for a quicker local installation of browser tricks that will be more swift. We also need to figure out some stuff about the workflow, but at least we have it locally. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the benefit, one of the benefits is having everything in this, easy to use GUI. So you're crawling, you're getting the results, you're looking at the results, all kind of in the same place. And in the earlier session with Quinn at Stanford, they mentioned giving this tool up to librarians who may not be web archiving experts. So I'm curious, maybe this is a Browsertrix Cloud developer question, but maybe the other panelists have ideas. Like if this is a crawling system for all, how do non-experts identify whether or not they've really got something? Like Sholto, you had mentioned problems with Wix, and I know because I do this every day that Wix uses like the dynamic image resizing, and I know that on replay it's impossible for Wayback to kind of determine which image it wants to replay. But another librarian might look at it and say, I just don't have it. So how, especially with Browsertrix Cloud moving to software as a service, how are we gonna help manage expectations for people who are using this tool to collect, who might not have this expert knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a very important one. I think definitely something that we've been thinking about a lot. And I think the answer to that is some sort of automated QA, which is sort of one of the holy grails of web archiving, perhaps. In that, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to communicate to users, even when a crawl is completed, how well, yes, you have 100 out of 100 pages or however many, but how well are those pages archived? And so we're thinking of ways to automatically be able to evaluate pages that have been captured based on perhaps different criteria. I mean, there's some ideas around that. Yeah, that could sort of communicate to users. For example, an easy one would be, how many 404s are there when you replay the page, or something like that. But that's not going to be enough for everything. Or are there a significant number of JavaScript errors when the page loads in replay? And those are sort of quantifiable things that we could also, using automated browsers, automatically check for and then communicate to users. So that's going to be an important future phase that I think will be a long way in making web archives more accessible without having this kind of specialized curatorial and QA knowledge beforehand.
Thanks. Anybody else have thoughts on that before I move on to another question?
I can jump in, I guess, from the very, very probably minority perspective of knowing exactly what it is I'm crawling and exactly what needs to be there. I think that like one thing that I've had to develop is kind of a pre-web archiving strategy that actually does go through and essentially create kind of a manifest of what all should be appearing. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to go into before you do the web archive and then after you do the web archive. So, you know, like testing and running something is, you know, fun and it's gratifying to be able to see it all appear on the screen, but like knowing what you need to be capturing and knowing what should be showing up and then knowing where to look for all those little possible problem areas is an essential part of that QA that is, you know, there's no like fixed rubric for it, because I think so much of what is on the web is so different. Like you don't know if there are videos embedded, you know, 3 clicks in, you don't know if it's not something that you've built yourself or that you've been involved in building. I think that becomes a much harder challenge. And even, you know, working with the projects that I work on in production during the publishing process for, you know, 6 months, there are still things that I might not catch on my first attempt at, you know, cataloging everything. So it's definitely a huge process of web archiving is the pre-actual using of the tool.
Yes. I'm curious to know what other kinds of challenges do you wish you had known about ahead of time? Or if there's any interest in the group about developing a kind of like knowledge base for known challenges, so we can kind of communicate what we should expect from a crawl of a given type of website.
I think that would be really useful. One thing is you sort of only know what you know, right? And there'll be often times where you run into things that you're sure other web archivists are having the same problems with, but it's not always easy to find out that information. I mean, you generally just can't Google it. So having some kind of group or some kind of area or database or whatever where these kind of issues are uploaded as a community, and you can go and look and say, oh, hey, they're having the same issue, or we had a solution for this. That may exist already and I don't know about it, but that would be awesome.
It could also be documentation that, for instance, for top 5 social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that you can, one thing is that you can specify a browser profile, but you can also just load a template from Webrecorder and say, okay, this is, if you want to do a Facebook harvest of one profile, this is the way. And you have to also include these and these, maybe, other domains, even though that you can specify it maybe a smarter way. But that could be interesting to have a template for like at least some of the major technologies, or documentation saying, okay, you have to be aware that when you do this and this, you need to fill in this, because you can, of course, cannot do it for all sites and all technologies, but it would help a lot if you knew a bit more about what to fill in, for instance, when you go for Facebook, because sometimes it's obvious what it is, but sometimes you might need to, you could be in doubt if you should fill in more like subdomains, or will it actually get it? So I think documentation and maybe some training and some best practice could be great in the end of the project to do. Now we're experimenting and figuring out a lot of stuff and doing the actual code, but great use cases could really be interesting. Also in terms of how many Facebook pages will it get if you're not logged out? Is it just completely different for each person or each profile, or that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think the way that when we're having these conversations, how you could just see everybody in the, well, in this case, the virtual room nodding when someone talks about trying to get a good archive of a Squarespace site. Like, it goes to show we need like a formal one place. This is where you go to look at these things, which, I mean, Iipc, we hear these same things. We know what they are kind of, but it's hard to keep track of them because they're always changing. And maybe we just need a report, issue in the UI of Browsertrix Cloud when you're replaying a site to say this isn't working, and kind of have that go somewhere. Is this a known issue? Is this user error? Because sometimes it is just it may not be replaying correctly, but you got it. But
Yeah.
just some way to automate this and make it easy to report this somewhere.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, sanity checks, just, knowing, like, people learning to tell the difference between what will capture, what won't capture, what should capture, what they might be doing wrong. Yeah, Andreas.
Yeah, and that reminds me on an idea which we had in the Iipc years ago, to have one domain where we deploy all the pages which have problems, or where we can test all these things with all kind of crawlers. And as Lauren said, okay, if we have a button in Browsertrix, maybe that this is a problematic page, then we could deploy that part of that problematic page on our test Iipc domain, so that everybody can participate and get the look and feel of the problem. So, but I know that's all complex and much work, but yeah. But when we are allowed to think about ideas, then I think we should, remember on that idea.
I'm imagining, like, with the earthquakes here, there's this site everybody goes to, USGS, to like say, I felt it. Or, there's the did you feel it link, and you explain like what your experience was. I'm also thinking about like the Wikipedia, history, documentation about how things have changed, like what's been added, what's been taken away, like what things have changed. If there was some kind of, like about kind of thing about each web archive where you could both report like what's missing, like a what's missing link. If you notice that something is missing that you're expecting to be there, to be able to report that, and then also to like be able to like capture what all has been, patched maybe over time, what has changed, what's been reported, and what's been fixed. That would be useful too.
I thought I saw Ilya's wheels turning, but we
Yeah,
also have some more questions. So go ahead, Ilya.
Oh, yeah, just really, yeah. I mean, I think these are all great ideas. I think I saw that Ed put our forum in the chat, so that's definitely one avenue. We can think about other ways to report issues that are specific to a particular site, or crawl config. That might be interesting idea. Yeah, because it's definitely sort of a complex, like, things can go wrong for a number of reasons, including just a website being down for a few seconds or something like that. Who knows? But yeah, we can definitely think about ways to make it easier to collate bug reports and as well as solutions.
Thanks, Ilya. I want to get to a question in the Q&A from Gulnar. Is Browsertrix available in other languages for non-English speakers to use?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we actually the UI does actually have localization built in. We haven't actually localized it into any other languages, but we could enable that. If anyone would like to help us translate some of the text into other languages, that would actually be really helpful, as I believe that we do have already support built in for extracting all of the text into a string table. So thanks to the great work of Sue, who's our front-end developer, that's already in place. We just haven't enabled it yet. And then I also want to mention there's the UI itself. Then there's also separately in the crawl config, there's an option to choose the default language for the browser. So you could have there's the actual UI of Browsertrix Cloud, but you could also choose which language the browser that's doing the crawling starts in, because many sites of course return different content based on the default browser language setting, and so that's already available in the crawl workflow setup. I believe you can choose any language that's available in Chrome.
That's cool. So you can archive stuff in another language and
Yes.
capture it.
Yes, even if the UI itself is in English, yeah. So those are kind of two different settings that we could potentially. The UI itself isn't localized yet, but the setting for the browser is should already be there.
Okay, yeah, I'm really curious, especially after hearing the presentations from our Mexican colleagues about like the language, the translation errors or issues with just calling it web archives. So I'm curious how we're gonna fix that as a community. And so let's see, we've got another kind of comment question from anonymous attendee. Will any of us be putting together a cookbook? So maybe we kind of captured this. Another comment was from Nicole Greenhouse. I really like the use of Trello for these issues, and that kind of collaboration sounds useful. Any more questions? I have a specific one. For Sholto, you guys had mentioned images encoded with intrinsic values as a challenge, encoded formats. And we have had some problems with base 64 images. Has anyone else on the call kind of experienced this? They're really big, take up a lot of space. No? Cool, thank you.
We are.
Well, that answers that. And so, yeah, my question was just for developers who may be facing it. Ilya?
I think base 64 images should just be are you talking about inline images that are just in the page? I think those should just be getting captured along with the page. So but yeah, if there's something specific with that, we could take a look.
Maybe the problem is the length of a URL. If some crawler or in replaying things, I think I have seen in some WAG libraries that we have that limit of 2083 chars for a link, and I'm not sure if that embedded image, that base 64 image is treated as a URL. Often you need to increase that limit of a URL on a certain place deep in the library. So that's maybe a hint or something else.
Possibly, yeah. We could take a look at that if that's. I think I've probably seen URLs longer than that already, but yeah, we can look at that limit if it's still there.
Thank you. Okay, well, I've run out of questions. Do you all have any questions for each other? No? Going once, going twice?
I guess I could.
Yeah.
I'll ask one. Yeah. So in terms of those who have deployed it or who have tried deploying Browsertrix Cloud on your own, I don't know if there's, do you have any suggestions that you would have for improving the documentation or anything that could make the process simpler? That might only be a couple of folks here, but yeah, or if there's, or I guess the question would be, those who haven't yet, is there any, whether are you planning to in the future, or is anything holding you back, or would you rather use sort of a hosted service?
So we want to do
it's more documentation in general.
Oh,
sorry.
You go first, Lauren.
Sorry, Andreas. Oh, I was just gonna say that for us, it's just, I think if there was more, and I haven't looked at the documentation if it's changed and since I recorded the thing, I'm sorry, but just more on the common issues that people hit, because I noticed kind of a pattern of, firewall issues if you're deploying in production. And I know kind of at Webrecorder, you're not necessarily deploying in every system or for production, in the same sense of lockdown servers that we are. But if there was more documentation on this, if you're encountering this error, it could mean this. Go ahead, Anders.
we want to have it locally so we can do the paywall sites with the Danish IP, the range we have already given to media sites, so we can use that. So we want to have it locally, and also we want, of course, at some time to test scalability. Nobody has mentioned this here, but of course it's interesting. How far will it scale? And then we definitely want to start with some important sites and then maybe expand it to, let's say, 150, 200 sites that we crawl between 12 times a day and once a week. That could contain a lot of embedded videos and other dynamic content that's hard to crawl. So that would be a great scenario for us, and I know that other people want to scale it even more, and of course we want to, but it would be a good way to start, and therefore we need to have it locally. Just like the good people in Luxembourg, they have to have a local installation because their newspaper with paywall will only accept IP from Luxembourg. Of course, you could proxy something, but that's how it is, at least there, and yeah. So I think for many people that can make these kind of deals, that's the way you want it. Yeah. But it's easy to do it in the cloud, of course. So I'll not say in 5 years' time, then we just have to see. I think it's a consideration in all national libraries. How much do you want to spend in hardware costs and renewing hardware and services? So of course it's an interesting question too. Where do you want it now? Where do you want it in 5 or 10 years' time? That's tricky.
I think it would also, it would be really useful for a lot of maybe beginner type users, like the authors that are creating the projects that we publish. I mean, we only publish, 4 projects a year at most. There are a bunch of digital humanities authors who are self-publishing, or their libraries are, supporting their sites. And so I think that for users like that who are creating content that they want to be able to preserve at different stages of development, or maybe just as a final product, I think it's most useful for them to have a hosted version somewhere. Like, they're not going to be able to deploy the cloud tool itself, and their institutions may or may not have access to that. And so I think that, it's useful for at the individual level, if it's a tool for all, that it is something that is available as a hosted thing that they don't have to maintain the infrastructure for.
Just make it
the press. I mean, if Stanford wasn't doing the pilot right now, I would, and I didn't have access to an instance of it, then, the press itself would have a hard time doing these web archives.
And then easy payment, Ilya. So one thing is that you can put up an institutional profile or something, but just as you do in Denmark, you use mobile pay and you just accept to pay. Then you could do a test crawl of some data. You'll have an amount of the pay and you just accept it, whatever payment options you have in different. I'm not saying that's easy to do, but it could be interesting to have, more like big, where you make most of your money, and then you could have like, what if just one person wants to crawl something? Of course, you could get into some legal stuff with, are they actually allowed to crawl? But could be interesting if you had some way of easy crawling something, see what it would cost to get it, and then do it. I don't know how. I don't have a business plan for you in that way, but it's to make it easy just to get that Facebook page that you need or something could be interesting, or at least some in the user group maybe.
I saw Andreas. Yeah, I saw Andreas and Antares on mute, so I want to get everybody's last final thoughts on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to add that it's not like with Heritrix a few years ago, which you could deploy on every PC or on every old server. This new kind of browser crawler needs a modern hardware, so we made the experience on old hardware. It doesn't work really, so you have problems during installations, and so maybe hosting in a cloud is for sure interesting for many institutions.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for the great answers. Yeah, I mean, and I think we're going to continue to support both options, of course, and yeah, and probably various things in between. So
I would like to say one word to the documentation also, because the hard thing is that there is so many different systems. You would need the document for Windows, you would need it for Ubuntu, you would need it for CentOS, they're also different. So a easy one out of the box documentation is hard to do, I guess. But probably it's useful to go to one Linux distribution. That's the one to use. For easy setup for beginners, use this. And when you finally have an idea what Kubernetes does, and our installation is still on one server, we would need to have it at least at 4 to have the ability to test the scaling. And so this.
Oh, with scaling, one last question. Nicola asks what the largest scale that people on the panel have used in terms of number of websites. Let's get answer for that, and then we'll wrap up. How many websites can you crawl at once? I think I did 700.
I think
The
we
biggest list was 350 Twitter seeds at once.
Yeah.
this is a bit different, but we took a really big hard to crawl site, TV2 Denmark, and I think we maxed out at but that's not the different sites, but I think it reached like 130,000 URLs or something like that. But just from like a seeded call on that domain alone. So that doesn't say anything about, of course, what if we took individual domains in, but it was pretty impressive in terms of how far it could actually go.
Okay, great. We got some numbers there. That's good. And I want to thank everybody so much for lasting to the end of this very long day or night